The draft new Public London Charter. This presentation will provide an overview of the new draft Public London Charter that is currently out for formal consultation. I will be taking you through the policy context, how we have gotten to this point in the project, an overview of the document itself, and next steps. The Public London Charter will be London Plan guidance. It is tied to the new London Plan, currently known as the Intend to Publish London Plan, Policy D8 Public Realm, which is what gives the Charter its statutory teeth, so to speak. I've included the relevant sections of the policy up on the screen, which are Part G and supporting paragraph 3.8.9. This policy asserts that whether publicly or privately owned, public realm should be open, free to use, and offer the highest level of public access. These spaces should only have rules restricting the behaviour of the public that are considered essential for safe management of the space. This is essentially the premise of the Charter that we are developing, setting out the rights and responsibilities for the users, owners, and managers of public spaces, no matter who the landowners of these spaces are. The policy as a whole sets clear objectives for the management and public access to public space and commits the Mayor to the development of a Public London Charter, which will support the provision of good quality public space across London. The Charter has been developed as part of the Good Growth by Design initiative. This supports the development of the Charter as part of the broader Public London inquiry to ensure that the public realm of the city remains somewhere where all Londoners are free to walk, meet, talk, eat, drink, trade, protest, debate, and celebrate. And crucially, that projects for public places can be grown out of the communities that live, work, and use these spaces day to day to ensure that our public realm is democratic and promotes civic participation. A number of the Mayor's design advocates are supporting the inquiry and have been of support during the development of the Charter as well. In recent years, there have been growing concerns over new restrictions being placed on people's use of public space, with increased interest about this in the press and academia. Many of you will be aware of the Guardian investigation into privately owned public spaces, or POPs as they are also known, which provided a snapshot of so-called pseudo-public spaces in London. Professor Matthew Carmona at UCL's Bartlett School of Planning has also worked extensively around the issue of the privatisation of public space, the publicisation of private space, and the development of new typologies of spaces in our global city. Creating an inclusive environment requires not only the consideration of the physical design of a space, but also careful consideration of how it is managed and governed, as this significantly affects the public life of the city. The development of the Public London Charter is an important step in responding to these concerns. The Charter, of course, will not exist in isolation. There are a number of other things going on that we are doing that have relevance for London's public spaces, some of which I have up on the screen. A City for All Londoners sets out the objective to promote good design in public spaces to improve everyone's quality of life. The Healthy Streets approach underpins the Mayor's transport strategy by giving direction to achieve this people-centric approach on London's streets. Culture and the nighttime economy are another policy plank. This is about enabling performance and programmed events, but also London's everyday street culture that can be experienced for free. In the face of Brexit, the London is open message is nowhere more strongly manifested than in its public spaces. In June 2020, the Mayor of London announced a new Commission for Diversity in the Public Realm, who will work in partnership with councils, communities and stakeholders to review and improve diversity across London's public realm to ensure the capital's landmarks suitably reflect London's achievements and diversity. It is vital that all Londoners see themselves and their history reflected in London's public spaces, and once in place, the Commission will provide opportunities for members of the public to engage with and influence their work as it progresses. We are also producing a best practice design guide for non-traditional types of public spaces, such as sky gardens, viewing platforms, shopping malls, museums, or station concourses. As part of the development of the Charter, we commissioned Centre for London to undertake a research project as part of the evidence base on which to develop the Charter. They produced a report which looked at existing public spaces in terms of access, regulation and enforcement, accountability, oversight and transparency, and resourcing, events and commercialisation. The GLA Intelligence Unit also undertook some research separately, exploring London's public realm from the user perspective, and this has proved helpful as part of the Charter's development as well. We also carried out an early engagement program last year where we talked to a range of stakeholders. We sat down and talked about the Charter and what would be most useful for it to address and cover before we developed the first draft. So this is the process so far and the overall project timeline. As I mentioned, the evidence-based work took place first, followed by the early engagement program and the drafting of the Public London Charter and accompanying equalities assessment. A draft for information-only version of the Charter was published in March this year. Subsequently, we have further developed the draft in preparation for formal consultation. This consultation commenced on the 13th of October and it will close on the 15th of January next year. This event is part of a formal consultation engagement program during which we will be talking to a range of stakeholders, including the wider community and interest groups, London boroughs, and landowners and managers. So this is the draft Public London Charter that we are consulting on. The document comprises the following sections: the aims of the Public London Charter, some relevant background information, guidance for implementing the Charter at the planning application stage, the Public London Charter consisting of 8 principles, some supporting guidance for applying each of the principles, and finally a glossary of terms. The aim of the Charter is to provide a basis of the delivery and management of public spaces in new development. This links to the London Plan and the Good Growth by Design initiative. The section related to implementation of the Charter relates to how it is envisioned that the Charter will be implemented at the planning application stage. It covers what spaces it will apply to, i.e. public spaces proposed by an applicant of a new development as a public benefit, how it will be legally secured, for example through a legal agreement, with example text to make it easier for boroughs to pick up and use included as well, and how applicants will need to demonstrate a space meets the requirements of the Charter. These are the 8 principles of the Charter. Each one, as I said, is supported by some additional guidance, and now I will take you through each individual principle in a little more detail. The exact wording of each principle will be up on the slides as I go through them. The first one is public welcome. This principle is about making sure that the public space is welcoming to all people. It should be kept clean, well maintained and well lit, and offer public amenities that reflect local requirements. The guidance for this principle touches on quality of life, well-being and sense of belonging, maintenance and cleaning of the space, things like drinking water fountains, public toilets and nighttime activities. Openness. This principle aims to ensure that the public space is open and offers the highest level of public access possible. The space should be understood as a part of London's continuous public realm, irrespective of land ownership. And the guidance for this principle touches on addressing severance, avoiding closures, and assessing the impact if there are closures. The principle of unrestricted use is about the public space only having rules restricting the behaviour of the public that are essential for safe management of the space. Users should be able to roam, rest and relax freely, and to be able to conduct activities that are permitted by law without causing a nuisance to others. The supporting guidance looks at avoiding petty restrictions on activities such as photography, a contextual approach where rules are developed in consultation and based on evidence with impact assessment, and an assumption that lawful activities like protest, dog walking, skating, eating and drinking are allowed. The principle of community focus aims to ensure that the public space enables users to meet, associate and spend time with others. The space should make provision for temporary, community-led events and uses of the space that reflect local requirements. And the guidance that accompanies this principle looks at things like events that are locally rooted, such as markets, cultural and community events, encouraging local communities to have an active role in the planning and delivery of activities, and the importance of celebrating diversity in the public realm. Free of charge. This principle says that the public space should be generally free of charge for use by the public. Temporary commercial events can help meet running costs and so can be an important element in a successful public space. But it is important that any events that may come with charges such as an entrance fee should be announced in advance and should not unreasonably compromise the accessibility and enjoyment of the space for other users, either through their frequency or the extent of the space that is used. The supporting guidance notes the importance of striking a balance between the use of the spaces for temporary commercial events and ensuring that the space still remains overall open, accessible, and free to use and enjoy. Privacy and data. This principle addresses the issue of privacy and data. It explains that the public space should respect privacy and private property of all users. It should not be used to obtain personal biometric or digital data of individuals or apply other means to intrude on their privacy. The supporting guidance for this principle touches on a number of points, including that smart technologies can help with the collection, analysis, and sharing of data on the performance of the built and natural environment, water and energy consumption, air quality, noise, and congestion, that facial recognition can have a disproportionate effect on certain users, for example, women and BAME people, and data protection impact assessments. The principle of transparency looks at how compliance with the Public London Charter should be clearly signposted in the space. Users should have easy access on site to the principles of the Charter, together with details of the owner and management company and any additional site-specific regulations that may apply. Additional regulations, if needed, should be developed transparently and through consultation with interested parties and relevant stakeholders. And the guidance for this principle includes signposting of rights and rules and how any restrictions should be developed through a consultation process. The good stewardship principle is about the management of public space on behalf of all Londoners. Day-to-day supervision should be informal, with both supervision and maintenance carried out in a manner which is considerate of all users. The enforcement of any restrictions on the use of public space should be appropriate and reasonable. Any staff engaged in supervisory activities should undertake appropriate training with an emphasis on making people feel welcome. And the supporting guidance for this principle touches on how spaces can be informally supervised, how businesses fronting public spaces can help to foster more familiar and community-friendly stewardship, and how training and recruitment of supervisory and maintenance staff should strengthen equalities, diversity, and inclusion. Now back to the project timeline that I showed earlier. In terms of next steps, once formal consultation has ended in January next year, we will consider all feedback received during the consultation and amend the Charter accordingly. And we hope to publish the final Charter in summer next year. Now I'll take you back to the main consultation session. Thank you.